In my part 1 Psycho video, I talked about its lyrics, music, and choreography. And I want to thank the people who wrote in and pointed out some pieces of the choreography that I had not considered before. There's obviously just so much going on in all aspects of Psycho. And today we're going to look at where it all comes together, the music video. As we follow the music video and we think about what the lyrics mean, we can see that the music video is telling us a story, a narrative of June understanding that he can't hide his true self from the world anymore. The first image in the video is the patient persona of June with this locked box in his hand and his back to the camera. I love that the beat drop is right when June drops this box. And the video immediately draws our attention to the fact that this box is important by reminding us that we have seen this box before in the Limbo video. In Limbo, one of June's personas finds this changed box and is considering opening it. And near the end, when he finally does rip the chains off, we get the reveal of the final Limbo persona. It's never revealed in Limbo what is in the box. It's clear that the box means something important. When the box is open, it seems like parts of June are freed. In Psycho, however, we see that June is giving up on the box. He drops it. So the suggestion is at the start of the story of Psycho, June is leaving alone parts of himself that he would prefer hidden. Right after he abandons the box, we see June falling in line with the backup dancers. So it seems like the box is representing his true self. He has now given up on trying to find his true self and instead is going to conform. Notice how with the costuming choices, even from the beginning, June is separated from the backup dancers. They are in black, he is in white, they go left, he goes right. So all these indications that he is different from the rest of the world, just like we saw in the lyrics. When June starts to sing, he looks directly at the camera. This is one of a number of fourth wall breaks that we'll see throughout the video, and it's a clear indication that the lyrics that he's singing are a message to his listeners. After we see him separate from the dancers, we see the patient persona of June in a new setting. He is inside this confined red box covered with the word silence. This is obvious imagery for his true self being hidden away, silenced by the world's expectations. But interestingly, the box is in no way secure. There's big holes in it. So we get the sense that there's no way to hide your real self, even if you want to. The box that he's hidden away in is not really keeping him in or protecting him from the outside world. I also like the detail that this hole looks sort of crumbly, matching with the lyrics. Then the video switches back to patient June in the setting we saw him in before, and here he's contemplating this square apple. And June said that the apple is square just to make it look more unique, so another symbol of difference in a world that expects sameness. Here, June thinks about taking a bite of this apple, but ends up throwing it away. This goes perfectly well with the first verse's rejection of trying to understand himself and instead choosing conformity. The apple is a traditional symbol of temptation. Here, June is rejecting his temptation to be his true self. And immediately after that, the beat of the song as well as the background shows June trying to keep up with the world's expectations. But as we mentioned before, this striking image of the hands around him and the crazy laughter in the background indicate clearly to us that he is not able to stay normal. Then we see the patient form of June sort of disappear and we get our first introduction to the critic persona. I love how at the beginning the critic version of June is dancing on this glass above the dancers as if he is judging them from above, removed from the world. But even though the critic is separate from them, in the choreo itself we can see interaction. The dancers below are pushing and pulling, and June is responding to that. So even as he claims to be separate from the world, he is still affected by it. And in this perfect combination of everything, right when June says, "Don't think you're an exception," we see him now not above the dancers, but down below. So even though he wants to be separate and critical of them, the video is telling us that, just like the lyrics say, June is no exception to everyone else. Even as the critic sings the chorus, we get this quick flash of patient June inside this red box. A reminder that his inner self, although trapped and silenced currently, is still there. Right as the critic finishes singing the chorus, we get this image of patient June walking in front of this grid, and then flashes of, for the first time, scientist June. Again, the imagery is suggestive of the patient being tested or sort of put through his paces to keep up with the world. But at the same time, this switching between these two different versions reminds me a little bit of like switching characters in a video game, as if we're activating a new persona. And that indeed is what appears to be happening next in the story, because patient June is now looking at that square apple again, and this time he gives into the temptation and takes a bite. And once patient June, who was the symbol of conforming to the world, gives into this temptation to know more, he is no longer the main persona. Now the scientist takes over. And look at this gorgeous transition here. Patient June takes a bite of the apple, throws it up, and then scientist June catches it. So this perfect transition between characters, and this indication along with the lyrics that the character's attitude has changed. We're no longer trying to conform, we're now trying to understand. We see imagery of the scientist June trying to investigate things, just as the lyrics talk about this. And we also have these flashes of patient June in the red box, but now he's kicked the wall down and we get another fourth wall break. And in this one, patient June is actually coming up and touching, looking at the camera. So in the second verse, where the lyrics are about trying to figure out what's going on and understand yourself in the world, we have this inner persona of June realizing he is being watched and trying to interact and find out more. But wait a second. If we transition from patient June to scientist June, why are we now seeing patient June again? And why, in the next shot, do we see critic June, but this time trapped in a chained glass box? The thing is, the Psycho music video is not just a narrative. It's actually more layered than that. Going back, we can see that the first version of June that we were introduced to, when he goes over the edge of this structure, he lands in the red box. So we have clearly a distinction between patient June in the inner world, in the red box, and patient June in the outer world, in the sort of metallic landscape that also includes the backup dancers. Critic June we saw in this cold, industrial, metallic outer world, and now we get introduced to him in this chained, confined glass box. So each persona of June has two versions representing his presentation to the world and representing his inner self. And throughout the video, as different parts of June's persona emerge, other parts retreat. So as we see the patient and the scientist try to explore more in the video, June's critic persona gets chained up. Just as the inner part of June's patient persona is still there, the inner portion of June's critic persona is there as well, trying to test his confinement. And once again, just like in Limbo, glass is a huge transition point. As critic June pushes against and starts to crack his cage, we get to introduction of the next inner persona. The scientist reappears here on this chandelier of glass and chains. This seems to be the inner part of the scientist persona. While the other one was interacting with the world, trying to explore, this one is trapped by its separation and distance from the rest of the world. And by this point, we've probably noticed that there are some distinct color choices in the creation of this inner and outer world. The outer world is presented in cool colors, and the other main color in the video is red. And almost all of the scenes that are associated with a more personal or inner sense of June are red. So the red box where his patient persona is kept, the red apple tempting him to know himself better, the scientist who's trying to understand more about him in this bright red coat. So the palette of the music video is reinforcing this difference between an inner world and an outer world. Returning to the narrative, we see scientist June singing the chorus with flashes of patient June trapped in this red box. It's interesting to note that even though before patient June had kicked open the side of his box, he is still inside. The flashing red lights and his body position in these scenes suggest that he is uncomfortable coming out, but also unable to avoid interaction that is coming for him. Something is going to have to change. He's not going to be allowed to remain in his comfortable box. While patient June is struggling with this, we're still with scientist June on the chandelier. And in this section, we get a glimpse. The chandelier is hanging over this road, a foreshadowing of where the final scenes will take place. As we talked about with the lyrics, the scientist is not able to discover something that changes his situation. Investigating it was not a solution, and therefore he turns to destruction. But instead of being able to destroy the world, instead, the tables are turned, and the video shows us that now scientist June is being controlled. We can see it in the video going to black and white, removing that red color, which is a symbol of his inner self. And of course, very explicitly, we see it in the dancers surrounding him and forcing him down. And then the choreo comes in to reinforce this, because here we see June dancing in step with the backup dancers, suggesting that he has become controlled by the world. Even as June's scientist persona seems to be controlled by the world, we get a flash of this inner scientist on the chandelier. So the video is constantly reminding us that even while one persona may be controlled, other personas exist and are under the surface. Everything at this point is working together to reinforce this idea of an unstable, split personality. June's deranged laughter and then quick switch to a blank face, the cutting back and forth between the different personas. We are meant to feel off balance and uncomfortable, just like the character in the lyrics. As the second chorus finishes, it's revealed that critic June, in his own cage, has that chained box that we saw at the beginning of the video. And critic June seems to be increasingly frustrated with his confinement. We see him screaming and eventually breaking open the glass. And just as we saw in Limbo, breaking glass is a transition here to freeing this final persona. It's clear just from this short dance sequence that the Joker persona is the wildest and most out of control. And notice how interestingly the colors in his costume are a combination of the colors that we've seen before. There's the black, but there's also his red pants. So in some ways, the Joker persona maybe is a combination of certain parts of June. These scenes actually remind me a lot of the final scene and the final look in Limbo. The color palette is similar, and also this sense that the character is completely unhinged. We've got this crazy laughter, this manic dancing style, and this sense of a total loss of control. But even as we're getting a sense of the Joker's character, we're still being reminded by the video that June's other personas are here. The inner scientist is still here. The inner critic is still here, and still in that chained box. We have this one moment of pause where June looks up and we see this gorgeous shot of these raindrops falling on him. It's like a breath before the chaos of the final scenes. Rain can serve as a symbol of renewal or rebirth, but also at the same time in the next scene we have fire. So we've got this contrast between water and fire and the potential of renewal from both of those. While the Joker dances with water and fire, we see the scientist trying to destroy everything. So in both of these scenes that we're flashing between, we have the potential for destruction. Notice, however, that just like before, when the scientist tries to destroy things, it is turned against him. And I think the glass hanging in the air against him is also a really interesting contrast to that shot of water coming down over the Joker. The scientist is surrounded by this glass that maybe is the product of his destruction and also could destroy him. whereas the Joker is surrounded by rain, which is not going to hurt him, and in fact may actually bring about renewal or save him from the fires that surround him. In the video, the patient, the critic, and the scientist all clearly fail. Is the Joker meant to be the answer to what we learn in the video? Is this chaotic rejection of the world's expectations meant to be the answer that the song presents? Very quickly at the end of the outro, we get a flash of all the different characters that we have seen so far, and they are all looking directly to camera, like one last check-in from each of our personas trying to communicate directly to us, the listeners. Right after we get the final statement, not to fool yourself anymore, we see the Joker stand up and get hit by this car. A shocking end to the song. Notice that the Joker is leaning into the car. The character at this point appears defeated. So it seems unlikely that an unhinged rejection of the world is really the message of the song, given the way this Joker persona looks at the end. The second question that comes out of this scene is, who is driving the car? And in this scene, we cannot get a clear answer. But if we go back to the previous scene with the car, the answer seems pretty clear. Jun himself is driving the car. Remember how we talked about each persona having inner and an outer version? It would appear that the inner version of the Joker is the one who is driving the car. So that suggests that Jun himself is not comfortable with this chaotic Joker persona. Just like the other possible solutions that the song presents, this one is not sustainable either. There's a tension between the lyrics telling us that we should not fool ourselves anymore, that we should accept that we're psycho, and the video, which seems to be suggesting that fully accepting that you are psychotic and crazy is self-destructive. The final thing to note in the car scene is that we do not actually see the impact. We see the Joker lean towards the car. We hear the sound of the crash. It actually blacks out before you see the impact. So there's a certain ambiguity in what happened. After a few seconds of black, we find ourselves back in the same scene where the video began. And the focus is on the chained box, which patient Jun rejected at the very beginning of the video. Now the box has been broken open, and inside we see this blackened rose. So there's a lot to unpack here. First of all, I think it's significant that the box here is broken. It's not that the chains have been taken off and the box has been opened. We're showing the destruction. So there's a clear parallel between the Joker persona being destroyed by the car and the box that the rose is in being destroyed. In Limbo, one of Jun's personas unchains the box, suggesting setting something free, but the box itself is never opened. We never see what's inside it. And this makes sense because Limbo is not about knowing yourself or about true freedom. Limbo is about escape into a dark fantasy. So the chains coming off suggest desires being freed, but we're not seeing into the true inner self of Jun, the rose in the box. As a side note, I think it was really smart for Jun to have done Limbo first. If Jun had presented us with Psycho first, would we have been able to understand and approach it in the same way? It's almost like we as the listeners had to escape into this dark fantasy world of Limbo in order to get our brains ready for being woken up in Psycho. But coming back to Psycho, what does this ending really mean? I think it's intentionally unclear. One interpretation might be that it is dangerous or self-destructive to give in too far to your psychotic self. The box that was protecting the rose, meaning Jun's inner self, is now broken open and Jun is vulnerable to the world. Is he in a more dangerous position because he allowed himself to be a psycho? Well, there definitely is a sense of danger at the end. I favor a second interpretation. Given the lyrics' insistence on not fooling ourselves anymore and facing the truth about who we are, I think that the box being broken and the rose being revealed is a positive thing. Yes, Jun's inner self may be vulnerable to the world, but that has been the whole goal of the song. It's striking that in order to break open the box, June had to essentially destroy himself in the car crash scene. This perhaps suggests that in order to reveal your true self, you have to destroy this image of yourself as a freak that you have developed as a protection against the world in order to reveal something much more vulnerable and also much more beautiful, as symbolized by the rose. I think it's very significant that the rose is not perfect, right? It's blackened, which we see happening in Limbo. This seems to suggest that June himself is not perfect. He's not untouched by his experiences. And yet, there's still a unique beauty to him. Whether or not we take the breaking of the box as negative or positive, it's clear throughout the video that trying to break away from the world's expectations is not easy. It is painful and yet necessary. And that, I think, is the whole message of the Juniverse so far. You can't just escape into dark fantasy. You can't just hide yourself from the world. You need to accept who you are. June has promised us more chapters in his dark world, and I can't wait to see where he takes us next.